Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the virtual launch of a book that I'm very, very excited about. It's called Not to Mention. It's written by Professor Vivian de Klerk. I'm Michele Magwood. I'm an editor and a book journalist. Let me just tell you how things are going to run this evening. You'll be able to interact with us by using the chat and the Q&A functions, which are there at the bottom of your screen. Vivian and I are going to talk for about 20-25 minutes. And then we'll take some questions from you. And as I said, you use your Q&A function to do that. We are all very happy that virtual and physical bookstores are open again. And I know this book is available in Love Books in Johannesburg. It's in the Book Lounge in Cape Town, and of course in the larger chains like Exclusive Books and Bargain Books. They're well stocked up with it. And I'm pretty sure you're going to be wanting to buy it. If you prefer, you can also get the ebook on Amazon Kindle, Snaplify, or on Kobo as well. So during the course of this evening, Pam Macmillan will post the links to purchase in the chat, and you'll also get an email the day after the launch with a link in the recording and all the details to buy your copy. Lastly, we'll do a draw at the end of this for 3 lucky audience members, attendees, virtual attendees, and 3 of them will win a signed copy of the book, and I'll announce those winners at the end of the launch. So that is the housekeeping for the evening, and it's time to introduce you to Vivian de Klerk. Vivian is the Professor Emeritus of Linguistics at Rhodes University, and now she's delighted to be called a fiction author as well. Welcome, Vivian.
Thank you, Michele.
Early in lockdown, Andrea Natras, who is editor-publisher at Pam Macmillan, she sent me this manuscript to read, and I gulped it down in 2 sittings. I think I took 2 sittings to read it because I actually needed to sleep in the middle of it. It's a remarkable achievement. It's something very new and very fresh and compelling, I think, on the South African book scene, Vivian. I think let's start by outlining the story of Not to Mention.
Thank you. I'll try not to give away the plot, but it's written in the first person. A young girl I've named Katy Ferreira, and I don't know why I chose that name, but she is morbidly obese. She weighs 360 kilograms at the start of what becomes her diary, and she's trying to lose weight. And she fills the time compiling a crossword and writing a diary, a sort of letter to her mother, passing endless hours, days, months, and her mother, of course, is the enabler in the scene. The novel is set in Port Alfred. It's a little backwater town in the Eastern Cape, which I know quite well. And Katy goes back in her memories to her early childhood in the 1960s. She's stuck in her room, she's on her reinforced bed, and she spends the time eating a lot, thinking a lot, writing, reading the back copies of the Herald, which her mother brings to her, doing crosswords, and she reminisces. She reminisces about wonderful foodie moments because she likes food, starting school, traumatic visits to various medical people who played a role in her life, and she analyzes and she wonders, and she becomes increasingly articulate and angry as she writes her diary, and she ventures into the unmentionable topics. And she tells her mother how it is, what it's like to eat in secret, what it's like to be as fat as she is, to be mocked and jeered if she goes into the public, what it's like to be alone, worried, not well, out of sight, in her house, in her room, looking out on the world through a small window in her room. And she gets angry and she writes cross words. Sometimes she crosses them out. And she slowly expresses more and more resentment. And I'll stop there because I don't want to reveal the plot. The end.
But Vivian, what was the spark of the novel for you? How did the plot begin to take shape?
It unfolded itself mainly through the crossword side of things, because I am a wordaholic and I've been doing crossword puzzles all my life. And I was fiddling around with the idea of making the answers to clues relate to memories of this young woman. And I've used them, and I had to get 70 of them because of the jumbo crossword that she compiled. And so that is the bare skeleton. of how I structured it. You know, the process unfolds. The process of writing is a long and arduous one, but that's really the other spark is concern. When we're all aware of growing obesity in society, in the world around us, and I'm rather fascinated by this phenomenon, worried about it. Mm.
It's unusual for a first novel to be so pitch perfect, I think, as this one is. It's an astonishing mix because on one hand, it's a heartrending portrait of an afflicted girl and how society and the medical institute have let her down. But it also reads like a thriller because you start introducing, as I say, it's like a slow drip of menace, start dropping into and it's as compulsive as a thriller as well.
It is rather dark, yes, and the unfolding of that plot didn't just happen. I was in the hands of a very good editor who kept on asking me questions about, you know, wouldn't I think about that? And I really would like to acknowledge Alison Turner. She was brilliant. She never told me what to do. She never made any changes, but it helped to gel my thoughts around the actual structure of the plot, which is woven in and around the cheerful thoughts, the happy thoughts, and the wonderful linguistic play on words that Katy enjoys. Because of course I also do enjoy words.
Yeah, Katy's very playful with her words as well, you know, with her alliteration and her.
Yes.
Let's talk about the title as well, because I think that's, well, because you are a linguistics professor, I can assume that every word in this novel has been chosen very carefully. So let's talk about the title, which I think tells stories on its own.
Indeed. There's a whole lot of things that society steers clear of and doesn't like to talk about. They are the embarrassing things, and there's a big theme of shame running through the book. The shame that Katy feels, the embarrassment her mother feels, the general disparagement and jeering that society inflicts on the poor girl. And she, sorry, what was your question again? It was about the linguistic perfection.
No, it was about the title, not to mention.
The title, not to mention, yes, of course. So I started off with the title Invisible, funnily enough, of the novel. But I came quite often to use this phrase. The mother uses the phrase in a sarcastic way to her daughter. And so it emerged, and it works quite well, I think, in that actually a lot of things are mentioned that ought not to be mentioned. And there's no holds barred when Katy gets angry.
Well, you know, another thing that you've done so well is to find this person's voice, because her voice changes. You know, it's very distinctive. Sometimes her voice is girlish, sometimes it's savage, sometimes she's swearing. How did you arrive at that voice?
It came through the process of writing. I became very fond of this character that I had created. I began to see her in more dimensions than just being a fat person. And I really think that this is so important, that we see into how people are feeling who are ostracized in any way in society. So I found I was exploring a character, creating her as I went. And her voice did emerge as a distinctive voice, sometimes angry, often ironic, and often witty. Yes, she loves to play with words, and she describes things quite carefully because they are the way she can relate to the world that she has lost touch with. She has to remember, and she finds writing this down and describing things to be quite cathartic and helpful as she passes the time, and it drips slowly past. Yeah.
Vivian, can I ask you to do a short reading from the book? I'd very much like our audience to get an idea of Katy's voice and of your writing as well.
Thank you. I have a passage selected, so I'm going to, sort of in the middle of the novel here, but here we go. I'm going to write about the lung specialist visit today. Do you remember the time? I was about 13, just before I stopped going to school, when you took me to Port Elizabeth for some tests because I couldn't sleep. It was the last time we traveled out of the Kawi. By then you'd stopped driving me to the beach to watch the waves roll in, crashing and thundering, foaming and frothing along the shoreline, the spumy edges creeping slowly higher and higher as the tide swelled. So deeply ashamed, I know, by the sheer size and heft of me, disgusted and revolted maybe, embarrassed that you might share responsibility. Getting into the car, the dark blue Ford Dad bought in 1963, was difficult, and you had to come over to my side and heave the passenger door shut after I'd squeezed myself in, pushing it against the flowing folds of my unruly flesh, squashing them into submission. Both of us sweated profusely against the plastic-covered seats as you drove. We never got to sit on the actual blue upholstery underneath. Keep it clean and we'll get a better price. That's what Dad always said. You should probably sell it now. I see they're advertising brand new Toyota Corollas for $5,900 at the moment, and hopefully the buyer will appreciate the extra clean upholstery. I sat there next to you like a sweaty bubble and endured your slow, cautious driving, unable to move or complain, while spikes of pins and needles reminded me of my limbs. You, nervous, stiff-jawed, your lips drawn together in a firm, sideways exclamation mark. What a pain in the neck, going all this way because you say you never sleep. Utter nonsense if you ask me. There are far better things I could be doing, not to mention the expense. What is it called when someone says not to mention, but actually mentions it in the very act of saying they are not going to? There must be a name for it, that insidious method of hidden emphasis and the cutting sarcasm that hurts every time. Not to mention all the other important things that you didn't mention before then and wouldn't discuss with me, like what it was like when your little sister died. And Dad, nothing about him, ever. That's it.
You must have done an inordinate amount of research into this condition. Tell us about the research, because you wear your research very lightly. It's something that authors often get wrong, and that is too much research on the page, more than is needed.
Yes.
It's perfectly balanced.
Well, I must say I had to cut out a lot of what I'd found out, because yes, I had a lot of busy facts and things that I wanted to try and include somehow, but they couldn't get in the way of the personality and the character I was trying to create and the circumstances. But I did a lot of reading. I had the Rhodes Library at my beck and call, and they have wonderful journals. I looked at the psychological and the physiological aspects of this condition, morbid obesity. I read some wonderful novels on the subject. There are some good ones. And I used the internet, found out as much as I could about the medical aspects of this condition. And then I looked back at the Herald newspaper, which is in the Corey Library here at the archives. And I flipped through that, the 1980s, the 1981 period where I was setting her writing. And I mixed them up into a big brew of facts, fiction, and some rather grisly details, which are unfortunately part of what one has to talk about in Not to Mention.
I'm thinking of that television program that's also on streaming, Your My 600-Pound Life.
Yes, I watched that, and I watched there's another one called All of Me, and another in the American channels. I watched them all, not all of them, but a range of them, and wrote down, made observations, and then I also just checked my manuscript against a professional or two who advised me whether I was correct in the facts I was spewing out of Katy's mouth. Katy Ferreira did a lot of research on her own condition, of course. Right. So she had encyclopedias in the house, which she browsed through very carefully, and she had Stedman's Medical Dictionary, which is a remarkable resource which the librarian from her school gave her when they were clearing it out from the library, and she just devoured it figuratively, while she devoured a whole lot of other things literally. So
she does have a very clear idea of her condition.
Yes, she does. She does, and she writes quite a bit about that, because she's trying to explain things to her mother.
Mm. Vivian, you've mentioned it to me in another conversation that you know what it's like to be the heavier child, to always be, you know, the not cast out, but to be the person on the side of the playground. Tell us more about that, if you
yeah, that people have asked, is this your personal experience? And I think I started in my early teens and my teens, it's just slightly on the wrong side of what people regard as perfect, you know, and I became aware of my weight, and aware of how critical society could be, and determined in my own self to watch that side of life. And so yes, there's some personal experience on which the germ of an idea grew. But I also did a lot of research in my time in linguistics on the language of contempt, the language that's the ugly side of language, you know, the language that is used in small groups where people criticize. And I drew quite a bit on how hurtful language can be.
That is fascinating. I find that absolutely fascinating, because then you talk about subcultures of language and different slang and that sort of thing. Is yes. That right?
That's right, slang and expletives. That's what I explored quite a bit. And sexist language and cruel derogatory language. And Katy was the butt end of that language, and then she starts using some fairly strong language herself as she allows herself to express the unmentionable things she wants to say.
There are a few techniques you use which work very well. The crossword, for a start, that she's compiling. I mean, that's a wonderful framework for the story. But then also the news stories from the Herald every day. It's amazing how you manage to fill her days when she is essentially, just lying in her room.
Yes, the boredom must have been immense. She was trying a lot. She doesn't sleep well because she has apnea, and so she drifts in and out of sleep. She finds the nights long. She does the crossword puzzle in the Herald every day. She reads everything in the Herald, the adverts, and then she always notes some ghastly event that has just occurred, and it did happen. There was one I used, a headline of a ghastly knot of tapeworms floating down the river. So that would be a nice one. There's another report of a whale washed up on the beach, stinking the place, to high heavens. And she thinks she can smell that. And so, yes, so there's the Herald and all of those, sometimes quite violent, sometimes quite awful incidents. There's one where the family goes and digs up their mother because they forgot that she'd been buried with her diamond rings and they wanted the rings back. And, those kinds of, here's my ring. I love those myself, so I thought, well, Katy would love them, so I've blended them in. And then the crossword, when I first started the novel, each chapter was a crossword clue. And it's not really a crosswordy novel. If you don't like a crossword, you don't have to do it. And so I was advised, and well advised, to downplay the clues and run rather with the chronology of the diary, which worked much better. I was initially working on themes, and this helped me streamline. But I just love the crossword. And of course, Katy's crossword is imperfect. There's a stray word that comes in that, oopsie, she discovers it, and that because it's just imperfect like she is. And so the crossword is printed at the back of the book for those who love to do a crossword, but you can ignore the crossword clues. And yet the explanations relate to cryptic things, double meanings, secrets, meanings that Katy is determined to reveal.
Because she's such a bright girl.
Yeah, she was doing so well at school, and then she withdrew from school. She colluded with her mother in this withdrawal from school in order to emerge better, thinner. But her last reports, which are in the cupboard, she keeps on looking at the cupboard and thinking about all the things in the cupboard that she remembers. The last pair of panties that she could fit into, the last bra that she couldn't put on, her old tennis racket. And so she passes the time by going through all of those things that she's left in the cupboard.
So, Vivian, you spent decades teaching and lecturing,
Yes.
and I think you took early retirement to write this book. Is that right? How did it come about? How did it get to be published?
Okay, yes, I took early retirement at 60. I needed a break from that kind of precise, concise linguistics writing that I was doing, and I was very involved in the administration of the university, and that was lovely, but I knew I really wanted to write a book or two. And so I thought, well, you know, life is short. I must do these things that I know I can do. And so I took the retirement and I put my head down and I started to write. I made a special, beautiful study for myself, and I have been writing ever since. Now, it wasn't easy to get the book published initially. I submitted it to a publisher and they really liked it. And then the reader said, yes, do this. And then I did it and I get back and they said, oh, they still really like it. And I changed it again to respond to the criticisms, which were wonderful to receive. And then they suddenly went cold on me and said, no, we don't think we like it after all. And I was so disappointed. And so I thought, oh, well, at that stage, I was tired of it and I was writing other things and I'm always writing something else. So I just put it aside. And then across my desk came this opportunity to enter it into a competition run by Jacana. And I entered it and it did very well and it was shortlisted. And then one thing led to another, and Pan Macmillan, lovely Pan Macmillan, they put their trust in it. And it's been a long journey. It's been 5 years, you know. Yeah, from starting the novel. I finished the novel after about 2 years, and then the journey from then to having it published has been about 3 years. Yeah, long. You've got to be doing other things in the meantime.
Oh, yes, you have. Did you wish you'd done it earlier, started earlier?
No, I've had a lovely, delicious career at Rhodes University. They've been very good to me, especially they allowed me to do the crossword in the senior common room every tea time and balance it in amongst my teaching commitments and my research commitments, and I wouldn't miss it for the world. All of those wonderful students that I had and the good colleagues that I worked with. So there's still time. I've still got time to write some more.
Definitely do. I think we will ask the audience. We've got some questions I see waiting. Let's see what our audience would like to ask here. Hilda, wonderful to have the insights from the author. What did Katy like to eat that led to her obesity?
She starts, and the novel starts with all of the sweet, unhealthy things. There was a little shop that she would walk past, and she had money to spend, and she would buy all the wrong toffees, chocolates, every day. And her mother also treated her as a way to compensate by giving her sweet cakes, icing, cream on drop scones, jams, and she learned to, when she was an unhappy girl, she would compensate by filling her tummy up, which is how she got into this downward spiral of being trapped in her body.
I think it's significant. Maybe hold this up, you can see the cover. It's a very clever cover, sort of like a crossword or Scrabble, but it's set on sugar cubes, because I think sugar is, is central to this.
Indeed, yes.
So we have another comment. I was interested that Katy's voice is never that of a victim, but she is of her mother, society, her school. That must have been hard to sustain in the narrative.
Yes, Katy becomes increasingly confident as she analyzes what's happened to her. Well, I don't want to give the plot away, but she does get more and more strident and confident in her writing. And she believes her mother's going to read this diary. It's going to make a difference. And they've never talked about these things. Katy lives in a bubble of relative silence in her room, and her mother doesn't say much to her at all. In fact, Katy's voice is so quiet in her room that she sometimes talks to herself or sings to herself just to remind herself of her voice and what it sounds like. So her literal voice is muted, but this voice in her writing, she will not accept the way things are turning out, and she's angry. So she writes about it. And she's sad at times, and initially she is a victim, and she talks about her suffering, but not for too long. She has a sense of humor. It buoys her along as she has to deal with her dreadful physical condition.
And of course, you set the book in the 80s, Vivian. So there's no chance of, now there would be cell phones and there would be social media for her to interact with.
Yes, I was careful to do that. She sometimes hears some music from next door playing. She sometimes hears an African woman singing in the street as that person passes by. But the radio broke 2 years before and her mother didn't fix it. So she hasn't any way of communicating to the outside world, and she can't get up at the time she starts this writing. She cannot get off her bed. So there's no way she can communicate other than writing this letter/diary as she monitors her condition.
Right. Hilda, again, she comments that the experience with the publisher is encouraging. I had the same and eventually abandoned the novel. I'll have to wait for retirement to get back to it. Well done on persevering. And I say to you, Hilda, just don't give up and keep persevering. Because also, I think it's worth saying it here that, years in the book trade they have taught me that publishers are looking for certain books at a certain time. And sometimes your book is very good, but it's just not what they're looking for in their list, because there's only so many books they're going to publish, and and that slot has been taken up, the kind of book that
yes.
But that doesn't mean you should give up.
And the other thing I wanted to mention is there aren't many publishers in South Africa, let's face it. Wish there were more. And they're under a hard stick at the moment. But British and American publishers are not interested in deeply South African things. And my book is rooted in my life in South Africa. And that's what I feel I can write about with confidence. So I'm sorry if the British or the American people can't relate to it. And I hope that they read it, some of them, one day.
Yeah, the British publishers, the British audience wouldn't know what sugar mice are, or all those marshmallows.
Yes. All those sweeties that Katy loved, yeah.
Yeah. Charlotte, she comments, I cannot wait to read it, Vivian. It seems to me that fat is the last disability taboo. i.e. we would be careful with our language in describing someone with autism or in a wheelchair, what is the abiding revulsion? The idea that you can show it without caring about the effect on the sufferer with fat.
What is the question there? What is the abiding revulsion?
It seems that fat's the last disability taboo.
Taboo.
I.e. we would be careful with our language in describing someone with autism or in a wheelchair. What is the abiding revulsion? The idea that you can show it without caring about the effect on the sufferer, the abiding revulsion with fat. That's what she's asking.
Oh, yes, these are the secret prejudices that I think people harbor. There are taboos around talking about this or openly criticizing anyone for their weight, but people do say things, you know, these words that I've used in the novel, they are real. Perhaps they were worse in the 60s and 70s. I think things have changed now. I hope they have. And there's a lot more militantism, what's the word, you know, literally about the rights of people to look as they wish to be themselves in their bodies. But Katy Ferreira wasn't allowed that freedom, and she was in her body. She, you know, I was trying to find her there. And yeah, it's not an easy subject to talk about.
But I think, yeah, Charlotte's hit on something there, the last taboo. Andrew,
Yes.
do you think obese people will relate to their own lifestyle challenges when reading this book?
I hope that they will find it very readable. I wrote it in as the most compassionate way I could, in the most sympathetic way I could. Katy is my hero. She is fantastic. And she's a voice. And I think it's a voice that needs to be heard. So I would hope that people could relate to it. People of all sizes and shapes need to think about that and investigate their own feelings about people who look different,
yeah,
and behave differently, or on the fringes of society, excluded and laughed at for cruel and wrongful reasons.
It really is written with such affection for Katy Ferreira. And
yes.
says the cover is wonderful. How much say did you have in its design?
I think it's also, I also agree it's wonderful. They gave me plenty of say in its design, although I bowed to the superior knowledge of designers, but it came up with about 5 or 6 covers. And I must say, I went at first for a very bright and colorful one, but you can see I love orange, and this was full of lucky beans, or sorry, Smarties and things like that, and they were in reds and yellows and blues, and I thought, oh, this is what Katy would love. She really would. But they advised, and very wisely, that would appeal to a teenage readership, a cover like that. And this is not the light teenage reading that such a cover would suggest. So this is a slightly menacing gray. I love the way the sugar cubes turn dark at the edges, and I think it was very well done. And they did consult me. If I'd said, I doubt if they'd have listened to me if I said no, but I said yes.
Lucky for you. Now, this is a very good point, which I haven't touched on, from an anonymous attendee. You have the birds flying throughout the book. They're almost like light relief from the harshness. What inspired this?
The actual physical fact of sitting in my office, which has a window upstairs and an oak tree, watching the birds come by and thinking to myself, well, that's all Katy would have seen in the world, is the trees growing, getting their leaves, losing their leaves. Birds come, go. a butterfly, maybe if she's lucky, once a month, you know, a slug crawling across the window. And so I developed that idea by ensuring that her father had been a bird lover and had talked to her through the birds in Port Alfred. And I was able to then draw on her memories of other birds, because she can hear them sometimes in the evenings. She hears an owl quite often, which has, of course, a sinister connotation, can have. And so I described them quite carefully. I enjoyed that. And I have a wonderful husband who advised me on the particularities when I got them wrong.
So they really, yeah, they are something extra in the book. Nancy Richards says, what an honest and deeply felt book. Did it require a huge amount of introspection?
Yes, it did. It was hard to write at times. It touched, well, you only can write about things that you've experienced or thought about yourself quite deeply. And when I touch on some of those unmentionable things like menstruation, and talk about it quite openly and honestly, it's hard because nobody ever does, especially Katy in her particular situation, where there are challenges, huge challenges. And so yes, it's difficult to be honest, but I find that's when I write best, is when I'm really talking from something inside me, even if it's anger at society for treating women unfairly. Sometimes it's just that.
Yeah. Undine says, congratulations on the first novel. Were you sad to let go of Katy?
Very. Yeah. I'm sorry that I can't. Yes, she's my little creation. And well, I love her name. Pardon?
You lived with her for 5 years.
Yes, I did. By the time it'd been accepted, I'd forgotten the book. I had to reread it and remind myself because it had been so long since I created Katy. Honestly, it takes ages. But KT are two, consonants, K and T. And she found it very difficult when she first started to read our little Katy. She was overwhelmed by noise and the people, and she hadn't been properly prepared. And she looks for meanings in names, and she finds them quite often in the novel. Sorry, I drifted off the point there, but yes.
I'm not sure, but I'm sure you were sorry too. Anonymous attendee asks, are you also exploring the problems of a mother-daughter relationship? I think
yes.
Apart from the obesity, it's actually the mother-daughter relationship that you're exploring.
That is a mother-daughter relationship that I'm exploring. And, it's not my own, nor are all of those other experiences my own. But when one thinks about mother-daughter relationships a lot in society, they are critical. The first relationship really that a young girl has, and it's I don't know that I got where I wanted to in that novel on that topic. I need to write some more and explore that. But certainly for Katy, it's hugely the issue. It's her mother who is part of her problem.
I'm not sure you can answer this because I think it takes a whole book to answer this, but Roz is asking, was there abuse? Why was she fat? And were there psychological reasons for her overeating? I think it's a whole book's worth.
It's a whole book's worth, yeah. And I think she explains it slowly, but there were psychological reasons, yeah.
Most definitely. Catherine comments that I'm extremely anxious to read this book. With someone who has a mother who is morbidly obese, would this give me more of an understanding to those who struggle? Would this give more of an understanding to those who struggle with this? Because I find myself struggling to understand such an illness.
I would approach the book with caution in light of the particular circumstances. I think it's a sympathetic rendition of of the actual detail and the difficulties of coping with a body that's got out of control, and a fairly high amount of medical detail eventually. Yes, and it's you can't shy away from it if it's a reality, and that's what Katy tried to explain. Yes.
And Vivian, I think, you also write with an immense respect, if I can say that. It's not prurient, you're writing about the obesity or the difficulties. It's written with respect. Do you think that's right?
It's so right. It's what I tried to do, yes. I'm not the expert in this. I tried to see the world through this character's eyes. I also have deep respect for readers who will come to the text and make of it what they will. And I have a huge awareness, well, it was initially a hope that maybe somebody someday will read this thing I'm writing, and that awareness that you're not writing it just for your own fun and games. It wasn't fun to write, but that there will be many other minds who will engage with this in different ways, on different levels, and I respect each of them, and I'm dying to hear what they, if any of them, what they say about it. But yes, I try not to too critical of anything.
No. Another anonymous question is this a book to give to an obese friend, or do you think that would be inappropriate?
Did I catch you that to give to a person who has a weight problem?
No, yes, who is obese, or is that inappropriate?
Oh, yeah, no, I don't think that would be appropriate to give. No, it would be a kind of hint, I think, and it's a dark and sinister tale, so
yeah,
no.
All right. Liz says, your heart and soul are clearly present in promoting this book. Your passion for your character, Katy, is clear. Have you thought at all of self-publishing on Amazon or Kindle?
The thought crossed my mind right in the beginning when I couldn't find a publisher, but I've published a lot in the world of linguistics. Okay, I've done that, been there, and I didn't want to have to pay any money to publish anything because I've never had to, and I was just like, no, I'm not going to self-publish this. I'll just sit with it in my bottom drawer if necessary, but I'm immensely privileged to have had this opportunity that Pan Macmillan took it on.
Sure. Another anonymous person asks, have you personally known anyone like Katy, or had any personal interaction with someone afflicted with this disability, or is it all anecdotal?
I've known many people over my time. It's all anecdotal. I've not had any close dealings with such a person, but I was the Dean of Students for a number of years at Rhodes, and eating disorders are hugely problematic, and I became more aware of it then, and the background issues that students were experiencing, and fascinated by it. But no, it's not based on any person.
No. Nancy Richards asked, are you right, as you were writing, were you conscious of its potential usefulness to other young women generally in similar situations?
No. The short answer is no. I would have been too self-aware if I were writing like that. And I've never ever thought that this would be a DIY help yourself through these dilemmas. No. In retrospect, it might be of use. It might be an inspiration here or there, a comfort for some. Sorry, my glasses are slipping here. But yeah, I haven't got an easy answer for that. But I didn't write it in order to do that.
No. Well, Katy is, I must say, she's an unforgettable character. I certainly am not going to forget Katy Ferreira. So, of course, I have to ask whether you have other ideas for other books and whether you've got started on more.
I have. I've got about 4 or 5 novels in the back drawer and under the cupboard, and and I'm drawn to the darker side of life. So I'm writing. I've got 2 novels that have to link to each other, where the one character and the place is going to be the same. And I'm so enjoying writing these 2. But it's fun and it's wicked. And my main character is a sort of a psychopath or a sociopath, one of those kinds of people. So I'm busy with that and loving the life. I just need to get over this lovely wave of publishing this one, and then I can get back to that.
Well, I think we're going to start wrapping this up. And before I do that, I'm going to announce the winners. And that's for a signed copy from Vivian. So the winners are Vuyokazi Jamison, Marilyn Butt, and Roz Hughes. So Eileen from Pan, she'll be in touch with you. And I think that's where we'll end today. Thank you, Vivian, and congratulations. I really am looking forward to those new books of yours. Let me just mention again that PanMac posted links to purchase in the chat, and you will also get an email the day after tomorrow with a link to the recording and details to buy your copy. And that's all from us. Congratulations, Vivian. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been wonderful to have this discussion with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.